Welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I am your host, Brad Swale. Today, I'm joined by Texas Railroad Commissioner Wayne Christian. Mr. Christian was elected in November 2016 as Texas's 50th Railroad Commissioner. He's the past vice chair on the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission. He's a former Texas House representative and is a lifelong conservative businessman. Commissioner Christian, how are you?
I'm very good. Honored to be with you.
It's really my pleasure. I'm excited to speak with you, especially with the new Trump administration getting started. There's going to be a lot of changes in how the energy policies, the environmental policies, and so I think that you're going to have a lot to say about that. I gave a pretty brief description. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, it really is. It's drill, baby, drill. It's kind of nice to be smiling real big when you're in oil and gas for Texas because of the new administration, but in a brief number of days, the scene has been revealed. And I think one of the most beautiful things, we're living at a time that the president just addressed the World Economic Forum, and he told how oil and gas was coming, whether they liked it or not. And I think that was very important. A message of truth, finally, in a time that we've been fighting these false narratives against God's greatest gift to the state of Texas, which is a lot of oil and gas underneath the ground.
Yeah. So I want to ask sort of, what you think of President Trump's first week in office and sort of what you foresee from his energy environmental agenda coming up, and maybe how that compares to what we've been dealing with the past 4 years. Well,
it's night and day is an easy way to give that description. But amazingly, in the past few days, I think he's astounded all of us on how quickly he has moved and has done more in probably the few days he's been in there than many presidents did in the entire 100 days for sure when they started their offices. But I think one of the greatest curses to the opposition to the conservative movement that I think Donald Trump represents, I think what President Trump represents is far more than just the Republican Party. I think there's been a real division in this country. Over the last 4 years, it's been revealed. And I think it worked to the disadvantage of his enemies. I think had he been able to serve a second term, and I think COVID was a large part of his defeat the first time. But if he had gone right in, I don't think he'd have been able to erase, start over, and think through all the issues as deep as he has. Plus, he wouldn't be quite as ticked off as he was. And he had, I think he had motive both emotionally, and he had time, and he put his army together. And again, he did a lot of this planning during the interim, and we're seeing the results right now. For oil and gas, it's a night and day scenario.
So for his energy and environmental agenda, how do you foresee that impacting the Texas oil and gas industry?
Well, there's positives and negatives. Okay. The truth of the past 4 years, because of the Biden administration, because of the cutbacks they did that crippled the United States and the world, it made Texas, because we are more independent, because our forefathers made us have more private land than most states do. When they would cut the public lands back, it would shut down a lot of the entire United States, stop the development of Alaska, a lot of the fields, stop a lot of engulf all the development there. So Texas became more of the fountain. We were the number one regulatory agency for oil and gas on planet Earth, the Railroad Commission of Texas, not the Department of Energy in Washington, the Texas Railroad Commission. Why? Because we were sitting here with half the oil and about 40% of the natural gas produced in the entire United States. So if you wanted something done, you didn't have to go to Washington. You come to Texas for oil and gas during that time. Well, when you open up the rest of the United States, they're trying to accomplish a couple of things. Our oil companies, our industry have really profited our coffers of taxes. You notice during the last 4 years and during this session, the state of Texas has real avalanche of additional money. What is it, $24 billion or something like that?
Yeah.
And extra money to spend our legislature. Most of that's from oil and gas. At $80 a barrel, we made a whole lot of money, as did the industry in Texas. But the goal of expanding the production is just the more production you have, the lowering the cost, lowering inflation. So when you do that, and I believe I was listening to General Kellogg talking about the Ukraine situations he's negotiating right now, they're looking at what had funded Russia, what had funded the Iranian forces was oil. And when it's up there at $80 a barrel, close to where it is now, $78, $80 a barrel where it's been, they're making a ton of money in Russia, as are our oil and gas producing companies, as we are in Texas. A lot of taxes, a lot of dollars. If they reduce that to their goal of around $50 or $45, which is close to break even, there's going to be a lot less total dollar revenue, and a whole lot less profits to these companies. So where do we play in that game? And that, I think, is going to be the financial impact of this. It's all good in the long run, but we've got a shock coming we better adjust for. So in Texas, we've been eating steak, drinking iced tea during this time, even though the rest of the country's been hurting.
Yeah. Yeah. I did speak with Todd Staples, the head of the Texas Oil and Gas Association, about that. I think last year was they broke records for how much revenue they brought to the state of Texas through taxes and royalties and stuff like that. So it really is a booming industry still. And you have shows like Landman, of course, that are influencing public opinion. I think Billy Bob Thornton is the star there. He's sort of changing the perception of all of this. Why do you think that regular Texans, I don't know, like me, right? Why should I care about the oil and gas industry here in Texas?
Well, of the economy out there, forget the government. Of the economy, 40% of the Texas economy is direct or indirect affected by oil and gas. Let's take the government, what pays for your public schools, your roads, your life, everything like that. All of government right now, you got all of the rainy day fund, which protects us against, we have extra money to do things that other states don't. All the rainy day fund comes from oil and gas. All the higher education fund comes from oil and gas, which is your colleges and universities. All the public school funds come from oil and gas, which is the money from that. So when you start looking, the overage we enjoy as Texans that we expand and can thumb our noses at Uncle Sam, we can spend $11 billion defending the border when they wouldn't do it. It all was paid by oil and gas through the rainy day fund.
Yeah.
Then you come back to public schools, higher education, all of these things, that's oil and gas. And I think people do not realize how important it is. For every dollar the legislature funds the Railroad Commission of Texas, they return the state of Texas $78. That's a 78-to-1 return on investing in the Railroad Commission of Texas and oil and gas. That's the return oil and gas does for the citizens of Texas.
So obviously the oil and gas industry faces a lot of opposition from activists, not only locally, but across the state, nation, and the world through environmentalism and the Green New Deal and net zero and stuff like that. You as commissioner, what's going on with net zero? Is that a pipe dream? Is that something that, I don't know, what do oil and gas companies think about that? What's going on?
I'll quote the president yesterday at the World Economic Forum. It's a scam.
Okay.
Green movement, environmental catastrophe, all this is a scam. And I've said that for years. You're looking right now at the zero. You mentioned the zero future, whatever we're going to zero. Do you realize that BlackRock and the other big investment companies and the banks and all in the United States have pulled out of the United Nations Zero Accord this past, think about 4 months ago, because it was a failure. It's a scam. You can't do it. People don't understand when they talk about zero carbon. You hear all the news right now. That's the current label. Let me just say, I'm old enough to have lived through a lot of these scams. Started back, we had the Great Ice Age back in, I think, the 70s. Time magazine, the Arctic ice freeze, the upcoming freeze. Well, all of a sudden it turned in a year's time, because that didn't come to fruition, to the global warming. We're all going to die. We're all going to fry. Then it got to climate change. Then they're going through different gases. They're going through, now it's methane, carbon dioxide. They've gone through everything. What people don't tell you, the industry itself, without government regulation, the oil and gas industry, the past 50 years, now this is an EPA stat I'm using here. The past 50 years, we've doubled the population of the United States. We've tripled the use of machinery in the United States, and yet we have decreased 9 of the most poisonous gases that the EPA has identified, the greenies have identified, are down 85%. We've doubled population, tripled the use of machinery, and decreased. We are the cleanest, as the president quoted yesterday. We are the cleanest industrialized nation on planet Earth. And yet the green agenda by these radical kooks in the scam agenda, because they want the money, they want to sell carbon credits. Guess who the richest carbon credit person is on Earth right now? A gentleman named Al Gore. Why? His family sells carbon credits. Well, how odd. He's out selling shut down and let's do away with carbon. Let me tell you, I heard this at a congressional hearing on carbon, CO2, the problem. And one congressman said, well, just Google. And I invite the listeners today, Google If you trust what Al Gore invented, which is the internet, which that's an old joke from my day and time.
I know the joke. I know.
Okay, well, I need to remember that. But anyhow, if you Google it, carbon dioxide is like 0.0001%, something like that, of the entire atmosphere. Then you put the second question in there. How much of this carbon dioxide is man-made that we can affect?
Yep.
And it's like 3 to 6% of 0.001%. You go then to, and you go to methane, which is the other thing they're yelling about, okay? Methane is in the millionths percentage of the atmosphere. Now understand, if we're 3 to 6% of what are millionths of the atmosphere, if we shut complete life down, it is a scam. My joke I always say on this, and it's not a funny thing, it's very serious, but I have to be kind of, I'm from Texas, hell, Senator Cruz said, when he was asked about the endangered species lizard, he looked at his feet and said, well, they make good boots, and that's kind of a Texas way you go. Phil Graham, in that history, I think you talk about the CO2, it's like a grasshopper farting in a hurricane. It would make no difference if we completely shut down mankind. And so that's the scam that's being played here. And what's happening, which concerns me, some of our major companies, oil and gas companies, are sitting here saying, oh, we're for a lower carbon future. We have a lower carbon product, lower carbon, lower carbon. Why are you hearing oil and gas companies brag about lower carbon if it's 0.001% and all this? Well, because there's this little account that Joe Biden and the Democrats put out there called the Inflation Reduction Act, which pays trillions of dollars. Give you an example. Down in Houston, Texas, there is this, they had the first world's largest carbon capture facility built. When I first came into office about 7-8 years ago, it was called Petronova. Petronova, you can look it up. Okay. And so me and Greg Abbott and Rick Perry, who was energy secretary, were down there, and we were there cutting the ribbon. It was a private free market deal. Government wasn't paying anything, right? That's what, hey, go for it. That's what private market is for. Went broke in 3 years. Broke. Guess what's opening back up? Petronova. Why? Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act is paying 90% of the cost to do it. And that's what's happening. These oil and gas companies, who are our friends in Texas, are sitting here taking government dollars, capturing carbon, doing all this lower carbon stuff. And I laugh because I'm old. I said, my grandkids literally are paying for it. We're trillions in debt. And this Inflation Reduction Act is $2 to $3 trillion of garbage like that, of throwing money after this climate change scam. Now, thank God the president this week redirected a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act to infrastructure instead of the junk that it was headed to. So hopefully we'll get some of that fixed, but I'm ranting again. Sorry.
Okay. No, you're the star of the show for sure. So, obviously fossil fuels are painted as evil through media and politicians and activists and everything like that. I live in Austin, and we have the Austin Energy is it's a locally owned by the city, right? Power company. And, they're always talking about divesting from fossil fuels and getting net zero. I think their goal is by 2030 or something like that. And Austin Energy comes back oftentimes and says, that's maybe, it's got to be a little bit slower than that, whatever. But all of this is really influenced by environmental groups, NGOs, Sierra Club, that sort of stuff that goes and talks to these people. Are for city of Austin residents or anybody here in Texas, are the fossil fuels, are they really as evil as they're painted out to be?
Well, let's just say this. What if you do away as they desire with oil and gas? They say, okay, the climate people say, we need to get away from oil and gas. We need to get to wind, solar, trees, whatever they burn, whatever. We need to get away from oil and gas because they're evil. You do with oil and gas, here's what happens in the world.
Yep.
In the world, organic food, which is what Austin wants to eat, not fertilized food, right?
Yep.
Everybody lines up at Whole Foods and pays twice the price because, hey, we're being clean. We're not going to eat this fertilized stuff. Fertilized food in the world will feed 12.7 billion people. Organic food without fertilizer is 4 billion people. Little math problem. There's 8 billion folks on the planet. Now catch this. You starve half the world when you shut down oil and gas. Secondly, energy in the world. Oil and gas is 80% of energy. Well, they say, well, let's replace oil and gas with wind and solar. Wind and solar are 6% of the world's energy. And a little other fact they don't understand. Wind and solar is one product, electricity. And then that moves to the third product. So shut down 80% of the world's energy. People will not have clean water. People will freeze to death in the winter. They won't have heat. So billions of the 8 billion on the planet will die.
Yep.
Okay? From lack of energy. 80% gone, wind and solar only electricity, and only 4 to 5% of the world energy model in electricity only. The other part is come back to the third characteristic here. You've got oil and gas are not just one product, electricity or gasoline. And you hear people say, well, we want the price of gasoline, oil to go down because gasoline will go down, transportation. They don't factor in oil and gas are involved in 97% of consumer products, clothing, not only transportation of everything, but you've got, again, so you're talking about you're going to kill billions of, and another little product of that 97% is called medicine.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you don't have oil and gas, you don't have current medicine we have. So if you do away with medicine in part of that 97% of consumer products, you're going to kill billions of people. So if you shut down oil and gas, 80% of world energy, medicine and 97% of consumer products, and literally 80% of the world's energy, and half the food supply. And people don't understand that being a greeny person who is wanting to shut down oil and gas is the epitome of arrogance and lack of care for people who have less on this planet Earth. We're so rich and prosperous in the United States and in Texas that it is a shield of I think, bold arrogance to say, oh, well, I'll do my part and y'all do away with oil and gas. And you've got 1/3, listen to this, 3 billion people on this planet don't have clean water, don't have heat and cool, don't have medicine as we know it. 3 billion people on this planet get less energy than they can, electricity at least, than that supplies a refrigerator.
Yep.
Half of that 3 billion, 1.5 billion, have zero energy. And we're sitting here as the arrogant people saying, oh, let's do away with oil and gas, coal, and others, and we will kill 1/3 of the people on this planet. I don't think we understand the moral dilemma we put ourselves when we have the arrogance to say, do away with the world's energy.
Yeah, it's a lot more complicated than just shutting down, a coal-fired power plant or natural gas or something like that. There's a lot of second, third, fourth order effects that would really change the environment in a lot of ways. So, I, as I live in Austin, I live in Texas. I want a clean environment. It seems like I have a clean environment. Are there other environmental concerns that we should be focused on?
Always. And that's why the Railroad Commission of Texas, by the way, is the oldest regulatory agency on planet Earth for oil and gas. 140 something years we've been in business doing this. Forbes magazine said the Railroad Commission of Texas is the most respected regulatory agency for oil and gas on planet Earth. Now, the reason I bring that is back to the environmental question. I have a sheet that you can get from the Railroad Commission. We have won literally dozens and dozens of environmental awards, national, international awards, different state awards, universities and other research groups have credited for cleaning the different things we've done and improving the environment, including one that's very interesting. 1 year ago, we won an award from the Department of Interior as the best in the United States project that year. Guess who gave it to us? The Biden administration. Now, I ask you, when these greenies come and talk before us at the Railroad Commission and say, you aren't doing this and that, say, hold it. How many awards have you won from the Biden administration for environmental progress?
Yep.
And so my answer to them is, would you like for us to do a seminar for you on the weekend to show you how to do what you're talking about? Because not only we hadn't talked about it, State of Texas, Railroad Commission of Texas, and the oil and gas industry in the United States have produced the cleanest environment in the world for an industrialized country. And the idiots of the green movement, and it's idiocy, when you say the way we're going to clean the world's environment up, let me tell you, Joe Biden in his second address to Congress on national TV, you can Google it and look it up. He says we are only 20% of the world's environment. The rest of the world is 80%.
Yep.
If we do everything right, it will make no difference, end quote, Joe Biden. So we're the cleanest. We're going to shut down the cleanest and make no difference in the world. We're going to start sleeping in pup tents out there in the yard with no air conditioner, no heat, no transportation, and that's what it is with that oil and gas.
Yeah.
And that higher ground is very uncomfortable without energy.
So, I mean, it obviously you guys are doing a really good job of protecting the environment here in Texas and still producing massive amounts of energy for Texans and, of course, people across the country and the world to live modern lives. Is there any role for the federal government to help with that process? I mean, you guys are doing great, but can the feds? Is there any role for the feds, or should they just sort of stay out of it and let you guys do what you do best?
You always need in a democracy, and of course we're a republic. We're not a democracy. The nation itself. We work under democratic principles. We're a republic, so each state should be respected. That if they can do something, we have a constitutional amendment that says the government should stay out of the way of it. We have the federal government. Now we have ignored that. That particular amendment's probably been abused as much as anything I think in the Constitution. But the practice is Texas does things very different because of geography, and we have many geographies in Texas. I mean, East Texas is very different from West Texas in geography, water, all the different things when you start talking about oil and gas. Yet the East Texas oil fields very different, but the feds have a place. Yes, they were able to put together our food system to where at certain times of the year, if this type of food was in this part of the United States, we would help some other place do that and transport it back and forth and put together a good system of eating food, even though in our local areas we couldn't grow it that time of year. Well, with oil and gas, it's the same thing. We have issues that we're concerned of providing oil and gas in the United States to the entire nation that the federal government can help regulate, monitor, and do things. But by and large, let's say you could do away with the Department of Energy and accomplish most of that. So the Department of Energy, I think, honestly is not required. There's some good things they can do, but the best you can do is have the republics where each of the states are free to do the maximum production as they possibly can.
Yeah. Yeah. So, let's switch gears a little bit. I mean, I think it dovetails pretty well to what we've been talking about, but ESG, environmental, social, and governance. It's a big movement. It seems like maybe it's, getting on the back burner a little bit, but who knows? It could still be happening and, behind closed doors. So ESG, how does that, how has it impacted the industry here in Texas? And what's your take on it as railroad commissioner?
Well, it has had negative results everywhere it's been practiced, put it like that, to the citizens, to the economy, to energy, to everything. Environmental, social, and governance was invented. By the way, it was invented. I went and talked before one of our major energy companies. I was meeting with their board of directors in Dallas, and their gentleman from Wall Street was their representative there that did their investing for their company, said, Commissioner, there's this new thing that's being presented in New York called ESG program.
Yep.
And Al Gore and Larry Fink of BlackRock are presenting it. And they're using, this was 8 years ago, so it was back when the Permian Basin was first coming in West Texas. They're using the flaring lights, the films of these torches going up, as a reason that they're getting everybody rallied behind this ESG stuff. Well, I got to looking into that and read a book by both Glenn Beck and Vivek Ramaswamy did a couple of books, two good books to read on the ESG. ESG is basically from the World Economic Forum, whose agenda is the Great Reset, okay, to reset world power. And the head of Greenpeace spoke in, I think, 2007, I think it was a few years back, and they had accomplished, I'm rattling. Right after COVID, they had talked 2 years before of initiating the Great Reset at the World Economic Forum. And COVID had advanced their program of world taking control by a decade.
Yeah.
And the head of Greenpeace spoke at the World Economic Forum and said, we have attained over a decade of advancement in our Great Reset of world power. Now the target must be energy. This is the head of Greenpeace.
Yep.
And so they then targeted energy. And from that, Al Gore, Alan Fink, in part, Larry Fink, go and start implementing this environmental, social, and governance agenda. I then I was the vice chairman at the 37 the states in the United States, the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission.
Yep.
Okay, that represents the United States on individual states. I was vice chairman, and Governor Burgum, who is now our Department of DOI secretary and head of the energy committee that the president's put together. Governor Burgum was chairman, and I introduced anti-ESG resolution for them. They didn't adopt it because they didn't know what ESG was. Like, it was that new.
Yeah.
And so Governor Burgum calls me up after I got through trying to get that. He said, Christian, can I take your amendment? And he joined me, and we passed the first anti-ESG resolution, I think, in the United States there at the IOGCC. So it has been a negative. It's a scam if people want to know more about, but it's starting to fall apart, as is all these things, because they're proving to be factually false. And when you got environment, social, and government, the environmental deal is their new Green Deal routine, which our president, thankfully, is dismantling as we speak, and has proven unsuccessful because you have, again, Larry Fink of BlackRock. His company has now pulled out of ESG designations in their funds because the ones were losing money that were qualified for that. Secondly, they just pulled out of the United Nations zero tolerance, the carbon neutral, carbon zero plan. They've pulled openly out of that. So these groups are starting to pull back because, let me tell you, our friends in Europe experimented with this stuff. They're ahead of the game on us. Yep. They've shut down oil and gas, built a bunch of windmills and solar panels, and they're going broke. Their energy costs are 10 times now what we have in the United States. And they are definitely, the governments are starting to explode. You're having the current leaders are being pushed out of office by votes. And that's why Trump at the World Economic Forum says, guys, we're back in control. Join us or pay extra because you don't do fair business with us. And all of this ESG, carbon neutral, environmental, new Green Deal stuff has proven absolutely false.
Yeah. So as more states follow Texas' lead in challenging ESG, do you think that there's going to be even a larger national pushback against the ESG principles? I mean, it's often, claimed that ESG is just a comprehensive approach to risk management. Talking about, I guess it's the environmental risk they're talking about. I'm not real sure, but do you think it's going to be more of a national pushback? I don't know if we get the 51st state of Canada, if they're going to be on board with it. I'm not real sure, but do you think there's going to be that national pushback?
I think there already is the national putback. Let's get Texas. We passed a law in Texas. You couldn't invest money in our retirement funds following this ESG stuff against oil and gas or against guns or against something of these social issues. And also, we had our State Board of Education. The largest retirement fund in the United States is the Teacher Retirement Fund of Texas. And my friend, when they kicked out this ESG stuff and environmental stuff, and they did this past year, all of a sudden, you got Larry Fink, BlackRock, you got all these others, Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street. You realize those three companies along the Vanguard, State Street, and BlackRock control 28% of the world liquidity. That's how strong they are. I mean, this is unreal, their power. They're back on their knees to Texas saying, oh, Mother May I, please forgive us. We want back in those retirement funds of both Texas and the teacher retirement funds. And so, yes, we made an impact. And Ken Paxton has taken that and filed against that stuff because I think there's many other states that have joined us in fighting legally on this type of forcing that type of investment. Because I'm an old banker, I am a registered investment advisor. I have a license, and I know that when you get that license, and in banking, there's called fiduciary responsibility.
Yep.
What's happening is they're filing that it's against the fiduciary responsibility of the managers of our retirement funds and these mutual fund folks that have trillions of our private investment dollars in retirement accounts in the markets of the world. It's against their fiduciary responsibility to invest in something using ESG or environment as a code to invest by if it's going to cause harm to the returns. The job of a darn investment person is to return money, not to do social good. And I think Vivek Ramaswamy has a couple of his books are very great exposing how the corporations, the banks and all have started going away from their not only just goals or responsibilities, their legal duties as fiduciaries on their clients' accounts. And so all that's coming to a head now. In some courts, I remember American Airlines just had a suit that a court told them they couldn't discriminate on this carbon and ESG stuff. And it's so the courts start saying you've broken your fiduciary responsibility to your folks. So yeah, it is imploding all of this false scam of climate catastrophe.
So I think that this was a misconception of mine for sure. So certainly other people have it as well. But I guess there's mom and pop style oil and gas operators that actually produce the majority of America's oil and gas, and things like the Green New Deal, ESG, Inflation Reduction Act, all that stuff that you've highlighted here. Really, it impacts them on a scale different from the major operators. Can you elaborate on that?
Certainly. And I think a good example is the current methane rule the EPA tried to put out that Ken Paxton in the state of Texas, the Railroad Commission asked him to fight that. We have many other states joining. And the methane rule said that you'd have more reading, monitoring of all the methane coming out of every production that you had. Well, back to your point, independent producers, a lot of people don't realize in the entire United States, not quite this heavy in the state of Texas. Me and Todd Staples at Texoga, my good friend, had an argument on this one. Texas is more balanced than this. But the United States as a whole, 80% of production is by independents, not the big seven. The big seven are your big internationals, Exxon, Conoco, Oxy, these big boys.
Yeah.
Those are only seven, they're international worldwide. And they are the independents, like you mentioned, mom and pop and independent producers, 80% of production, more importantly, 90% of exploration and development. The big boys do not explore a lot in the United States. Why? They just buy up the production and they make the money off the production that they're doing, right? They sell,
Yep.
But they don't do a whole lot of exploring. They're not out there wildcatting. They're putting the money at risk. Not a lot. These are the independents. The danger is whenever you have the independents go out of business, there's less exploration because the big boys buy them out.
Yep.
And they produce from their fields, but then there's a lack of future supply. And that will bite you in the rear end real quickly in a few years whenever you're selling everything, but your production is down, and all of a sudden you run out of resources. That's the long-term risk. So the independents, back to them, the methane rule, great example. 80% of production in the United States, 90% of exploration are independents, not the big boys. The big boys can afford this methane rule, so a couple of them said, that's fine with us. They got the money, they can put these monitors in everywhere.
Yeah.
It would, in Texas alone, close over 10,000 what we call marginal wells. Wells that don't produce that much a month, but they're producing safely and accurately. And a lot of moms and pops are getting royalty checks all across Texas. And you got a lot of different school districts and small communities. They're getting the tax dollars from these oil and gas production.
Yep.
And so you talk about passing the methane rule and shutting down over 10,000. And many of these small mom and pop oil and gas companies that are businesses employing folks all over the state of Texas would go out of business. So that's what you mentioned independent, but I think that's a good example of how you pass a methane rule you hear, and it shuts down probably about a third of the tax dollar coming in across the state to our schools and our local communities.
So what exactly is that methane rule?
Methane is, of course, like CO2. Methane is one of these gases that's in the millionth that the greenies have grabbed onto like they did the Arctic Ice Age or global. It's one of their themes now. It's like CO2 has been proven false or inaccurate. But methane is the gas that burns off, or the gas that goes up in the atmosphere. Mostly it's just like natural gas that we try to pipe out and all this. So they passed a rule at the EPA this past year or year before that was going to require that you increase monitoring of methane everywhere, such as on these small marginal wells out in the community, like I mentioned.
Yep.
They've been out there, they're producing a couple of barrels a month or whatever, just small royalty checks. Well, it's not worth going out there and putting new electronic equipment, wiring it up, fixing all the things. And these small independents aren't going to go put that monitoring system ever darn well out there. It's been there for 50 years in the state of Texas. What are they going to do? They'll shut the well down.
Yeah.
And that's why it would shut down over 10,000 wells in the state of Texas, which is a lot of the production, taxes, royalties that are going to the citizens of the governments of Texas. That's just the methane rule and how that can affect. And back to your having the federal government, how much involved should they be?
Yeah.
Here's your federal government doing a rule for the entire state of Texas, for the entire United States. And they don't understand that there's big, little, marginal, different situations, different geographies that you just can't pass a one-size-don't-fit-all. And that's your danger of the federal government versus each state in a republic taking care of their own business.
Yeah, so on that methane rule, it's not there. It certainly can't be the only example of a large corporation sort of supporting that because they can afford the cost that it might incur upon them. But their competition, the small moms and pop, the independents, they can't afford it, puts them out of business, and then they grow. The big corporations grow. Are there other things going on that you would like to see sort of, I don't know, in the immediate future that the state or federal, at the state or federal level, they could sort of level the playing field for those operators?
I think our legislature, I was a legislator for a number of years, and the legislature has so many different problems. I mean, my gosh, from the local problems to state problems to border problems, I've been there.
Yeah.
And I sympathize that they don't have the time to concentrate totally. That's very hard to work with when we are a industry of oil and gas that's, again, such a large part of the state of Texas, and you have a legislature only meets once every 2 years. Okay, so what do we do in the meantime when the EPA's fighting us like crazy every day of the week? How do we fight back? How do we adjust things on a 12-month a year, 24-hour-a-day fight that we have on rules and regulations where the legislature meets only once every 2 years? And they have so much to do in that 2 years, they really don't have a lot of time to concentrate hard on just oil and gas.
Yeah.
So I find that the sad thing is the internationals, the big boys we're talking about, who are our friends, who we want to produce in Texas, they're bad about paying Pac-Man, like we just mentioned. When the independents go out of business, they just buy them all up. It's like Pac-Man, and you wind up with the big boys controlling it and putting mom and pops out of business.
Yeah.
Yet, when our legislature is in Austin, who do they listen to? Who makes policy for oil and gas when the legislature makes policy? How about the big boys, the big seven who are internationals that have the dollars to lobby, feed them steak and they drink iced tea on the lobby dollar, and they're good folks, and yes, their views are good,
Sure.
and they should be listened to, but the independents don't have that dollar to do the lobbying with. They're out here working, making a living, pumping, trying to find oil and gas to keep the production up. So I find there's a big problem because I find these corporations legitimately have their lobbies talking for them, but the lobbies who are good folks are speaking for who? They're shareholders of these international corporations, who the majority of those folks ain't citizens of Texas. Think of that. Yeah. So if we got people who are not citizens of the state of Texas that are overly represented to our legislature to form oil and gas policy, I think that's a danger. And our legislators, I think, need to hear more from the independent citizens of Texas than international corporations, who the majority of those folks don't even live in Texas, many of them even the United States. So I think we've got something to fill there. Now, what I have proposed on that, one thing is I'm trying to organize an oil and gas caucus of our federal legislators and our state legislators, where we can come together 12 months a year for all the problems and be equipped when the legislature comes in with our state reps and senators and our administrators advised of some of the problems that our federal congressmen are having, or that we at the Railroad Commission with oil and gas and the rules coming from the federal government that may or may not fit, and how we need to work federal and state together for the state of Texas regarding oil and gas policies going forward. Now that's something I'm working for, is to try to organize that caucus. And so that's what's keeping me busy during this session, is going office to office to office to visit with our legislators and our congressmen. And we've had a lot of positive response on that. I just think it makes sense to work together 12 months a year rather than wait every 2 years and see what we can come up with in a very limited, tight, hard-fought legislative session.
Yeah, there's certainly pros and cons to that every 2 years thing that Texas does. And, it seems to be working out. We do have the Texas Miracle after all. So, Wayne Christian, Texas Railroad Commissioner, I really appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover before we sign off?
No, just excited. I think, we've talked about things like negative versus good, and I'm having to get my head kind of spun around the fact that we're winning right now, right? Yeah. I think something we need to be very careful as Americans, not just with oil and gas, with everything, that I think God's given us another shot at putting things together in our country. I really do. And I think we're coming together instead of the division. I see it kind of melting away to an extent, and the common man finally has the courage to say what he believes. I think we need to understand that we don't need to relax, retire, and say, boy, we won that, dust our hands, sit back and let Trump take care of it and Congress take care of it. We did that before. Yep. And we got Joe Biden because we sat on our butts and didn't step and continue fighting. So I would challenge all of our Texans, all of our Americans, whatever you believe, don't give up the fight. Stay in, and in fact, doesn't have a negative. Just don't give up supporting our military, supporting our Constitution, supporting our laws, and working and supporting the God-given ability we have as a democracy to elect those who believe as we do. So I just say, don't sit back and relax if you think we won and got this thing, because the fight is continuing.
Well, Wayne Christian, Texas Railroad Commissioner, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.